I'm here again to talk about the mess that has been created by the 5-year drilling plan. One of the reasons that I've talked about it so much, beyond the fact that it is so disastrous and dangerous, especially not only for all the coastal states, but our state of Florida that has more beaches than any other state, that is surrounded by test range. Indeed, just today, the largest rocket since the Apollo program to the moon has brought back 2 of its boosters that didn't have to fall into the ocean, but some may, and you simply cannot have oil rigs out there in the Atlantic where we are testing our military rockets and where, such as today, a commercial rocket, the Falcon Heavy, has dropped its initial stages. Same thing with the military on the West Coast. The largest testing and training area for the United States military in the world is the eastern Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. That's why it's off limits in law for another 5 years until the year 2022, and we need to expand it. Well, my colleagues have endured me so many times talking about how disastrous it would be, but now we have a different wrinkle with the Interior Department. So they first publish a proposal that would open up nearly every inch of coastline of the entire U.S. You're hearing all of these coastal senators speak against it, and they pick up on the eastern Gulf off of Florida, since it's off limits in law, year 2022, they pick up there and start wanting to drill out there. Can you imagine what that would do to the United States Air Force that runs the Eastern Gulf test range? Well, so now look what happened. They published this, and then the very next day, 24 hours later, the Secretary of the Interior jets off to Tallahassee for a 20-minute press conference at the Tallahassee airport and announces that Florida is off the table. Now, it was an obvious, transparent, political stunt, but it created enormous uncertainty about what was truly under consideration for drilling. So what did off the table in order to try to satisfy Florida's incumbent governor? What did that mean? Did off the table, does it apply to the Atlantic coast of Florida as well? Just to the Gulf? Is it the whole moratorium area of the eastern Gulf? Does it include the Straits of Florida off the delicate Florida Keys? Or will it be carved in half to appease the oil industry in the eastern Gulf of Mexico? The administration, specifically Secretary Zinke, is playing fast and loose with the process that affects millions of people in the state of Florida. And Floridians deserve to know what's going on. And that's why I sounded the alarm immediately. Within 10 minutes after Secretary Zinke's announcement, I've been through this process before ever since I was a young congressman representing the east coast of Florida with a Secretary of the Interior, James Watt, that wanted to drill off the east coast of Florida, where back then in the mid-'80s, we in fact were launching our military rockets just as we do today, and where the space shuttle was dropping its solid rocket boosters. So these 5-year plans are supposed to be developed over the course of 1 or 2 years with extensive input from the public, agency staff, from the industries involved, from the environmental community. 5-year plans aren't supposed to be a goodie bag of political favors, and they can't be undone by the Secretary's press conference or a tweet. That was confirmed by a career employee, Walter Cruikshank, the acting director of the Interior's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And he said that at a House committee hearing. It's no wonder the Attorney General from 12 coastal states wrote to the Secretary to warn him that he should terminate the draft proposal, terminate it entirely, or else they're going to pursue their appropriate legal avenues. The whole process has been fraught with confusion because it was a political stunt. And as a result, you've got a bunch of senators out here fighting to make known what is happening. And at the same time, the Interior Department is trying to open up America's entire coastline to drilling. They're also working to undo all the common sense safety standards that were put in place after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that spilled 5 million barrels of oil into the Gulf and killed 11 workers on the rig. And those safety standards include requirements like making sure an independent third party, like a professional engineer, certifies the offshore drilling safety equipment, such as the blowout preventer that malfunctioned 5 miles below the surface of the Gulf when it did not cut off the oil at the wellhead on the floor of the ocean and allowed that 5 million barrels to be spilled. And now Secretary Zinke wants to go backwards in time and reverse all of those safety standards. The American people deserve better than this. Floridians certainly deserve better than this. And I want to thank my fellow senators for getting out here and raising such a ruckus so that we can get the American people to focus on what is happening and the political stunts that are being done by Secretary of the Interior. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, let me first of all congratulate my colleague from Florida on the most recent historic launch, and there's no one who has been a greater advocate for America's space program than Senator Nelson. I appreciate his leadership, and as well as on this issue, which goes all the way from Florida across the entire Atlantic and, of course, the Pacific as well. I rise in strong opposition to the Trump administration's offshore drilling plan. I'm here to speak on behalf of New Jersey's shore businesses, the restaurants, the bait and tackle shops, the bed and breakfasts that depend on clean beaches to succeed. Their businesses are the lifeblood of the Jersey Shore. Their voices deserve to be heard. Their livelihoods are on the line. Yet this administration remains solely focused on what's good for big oil's bottom line. Never mind the consequences for our economy, the health of the planet, or our vibrant coastal communities. The Interior Department's offshore drilling plan reads like a wish list for oil industry executives. Clearly, the Trump administration didn't consult my constituents when drafting this plan, which, by the way, we had already gone through a 5-year plan. So there was supposed to be 5 years before we were revisiting this, and now we're back at it again. They didn't consult the shop owners in Asbury Park or the fishermen in Belfort or the innkeepers in Cape May, because if they did, they would learn that our shoreline is an economic powerhouse for our state. Each year, New Jersey's tourism industry generates $44 billion in economic activity, directly and indirectly, supporting nearly 10% of the state's workforce. And likewise, our seafood industry supports over 31,000 jobs. And we're home to one of America's largest saltwater recreational fisheries, supporting over 16,000 jobs. Together, the homes and businesses along the Jersey Shore encompass almost $800 billion in property values. So all of this adds up to a simple reality. Clean coasts are vital to the economic security of millions of New Jerseyans. And the same holds true for towns up and down the Atlantic shoreline. Yet the Trump administration plans to ignore the concern of the communities who have the most to lose. They ignore the more than 120 municipalities, the 1,200 elected officials, the 41,000 businesses, the 500,000 fishing families from up and down the East Coast who voiced their opposition the last time that oil and gas drilling were being considered. They ignore concerns from the Pentagon and NASA about disruptions to their operations from drilling in the Atlantic. They ignore the opposition of my West Coast colleagues to drilling in the Pacific. They ignore the Department of the Interior's own finding that the Arctic drilling comes with a 75% chance of an oil spill in a treacherous and challenging environment. Simply put, the Trump drilling plan ignores everyone except big oil. What's happening here is a dream scenario for the oil industry, but it is a nightmare for our shore communities. It's a gift to corporate polluters at the expense of our coastal economies. And by the way, you know, I love these commercials that I see that talk about, you know, American energy independence. As you heard my colleague, Senator Wyden, said before, we are now an exporter of oil. Well, how is it that you're exporting oil? You're drilling it here in the continental waters of the United States, but you're exporting it abroad for others to use. You know, it seems to me if you're drilling on federal lands and waters, you should keep it here for domestic energy consumption, to keep the price down, and to keep energy security. That's real energy security. Not having big oil drill here and then export it all over the world so that they can make a profit. I don't know how that makes us more energy secure here at home. But make no mistake, this administration's massive expansion of offshore drilling is just the beginning. They're also working to dismantle minimal safety standards for offshore drilling. That's right. The Trump administration not only wants more offshore drilling, it also wants to permit more dangerous offshore drilling. The Interior Department reportedly seeks to weaken the well control rule, the critical safety standards put in place after the Deepwater Horizon tragedy, which taught us something. If you drill, you will spill. If you drill, you will spill. At some point, that will happen. Imagine doing Superstorm Sandy along the east coast of the Atlantic when that took place. If we had oil rigs off the shore of New Jersey, we would have had spills. We would have had spills. So instead of saving lives and saving our environment and the economic consequences that flow from that, the Trump administration's actions aim to save the industry $900 million. During his Senate confirmation, Secretary Zinke promised to, quote, work with rather than against local communities and states. Well, it sure feels like he's working against New Jersey. The Secretary has shown no concern for the Jersey Shore communities that would be devastated by an oil spill. The shuttered businesses, the destroyed industries, the massive job losses, the birthright of every New Jerseyan to go to the New Jersey Shore and enjoy its pristine beaches. Which is why it's all the more baffling that Secretary Zinke recently said that after hearing from concerned Florida businesses and public officials, he'd consider exempting the state from the disastrous Trump drilling plan, When asked about the decision, the Secretary said that, quote, local voices count. Well, I'm happy if that's what's going to happen for Florida, but guess what? If it's good enough for Mar-a-Lago, it certainly should be good enough for the Jersey Shore. That's why every member of the New Jersey congressional delegation, Republican and Democrats alike, recently joined me on a letter inviting Secretary Zinke to visit the Jersey Shore. We'd be happy to have him meet with community leaders, business owners, and families who depend on clean coasts. And if he wants to focus on the economics of oil drilling, I suggest he start with the thousands of people who would be out of a job if oil starts washing up on our beaches. The Secretary needs to hear from constituents of mine like Charles of Toms River, who recently wrote to say, quote, we already have some shoreline concerns thanks to Superstorm Sandy. We definitely don't need another threat to our economy. Or Jean from New Brunswick, who wrote, tourism is a major New Jersey business. Our beaches are pristine and must be protected. Or any of the thousands of New Jerseyans who have signed my Coast Anti-Drilling Act citizen petition to permanently ban drilling in the whole of the Atlantic Ocean. Mr. President, the Jersey Shore is a national treasure, home to generations of family vacations, successful small businesses, and vibrant coastal communities that are visited from people across the Atlantic coast, Canadians who come down and spend their money at our shore, and so many others. That may not mean anything to ExxonMobil or BP, and it may not mean anything to President Trump or Secretary Zinke, but it means something to me. That's why we're here today, to give voice to New Jerseyans who have gone unheard. We will not stand silent while this administration tries to auction the Jersey Shore off to the highest bidder. Not without a fight. Not without a fight. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, one of Rhode Island's contributions to the cultural life of our nation comes from two brothers who grew up in Cumberland, Rhode Island, Bobby and Peter. From the red South Atlantic coast to St. Augustine, Florida, city after city, county after county, coastal community after coastal community passed resolutions saying, get